The youngster had been badly wounded in the back and side, and blood was bubbling out of the gaping holes made by two of the great fangs. In addition, 3 ribs were broken. Using his torn shirt for bandages, Stanley patched him up as well as possible and carried him to the bullock cart, and the long journey of 17 miles was begun to the town of Sagar, the doctor himself being in a bad way all the while. From there they entrained for Shimoga, about 35 miles away, where was a district hospital. It is sufficient to record that both of them recovered from their adventure, Stanley to receive a severe wigging from his medical superior, who reminded him he had been stationed at Tagarthy as a doctor and not to shoot tigers. Their fortunate escapes were undoubtedly due to the fact that the tiger had been severely wounded. Stanley's last shot into its mouth had very probably smashed the lower jaw, for it was noticeable that in both attacks thereafter it had used only its upper canines. Had the lower jaw been serviceable, there is no doubt whatever that both Stanley and the boy would not have lived to see another sunrise. As it was, many villagers heard the wounded animal for a week thereafter, roaring night and day in agony. Then there was silence, and there is every likelihood that it crawled away into the depths of the forest to die, for the carcass was never found. Stanley also told me of 2 other experiences at Tagarthy. Once while sitting on a macan over a kill, nearing sunset, a hamadryad climbed the tree in which he was stationed. He frightened it away, but as darkness descended, thinking the great snake might come back and feeling very uneasy, he returned to the village. On another occasion, while sitting imperfectly concealed over a kill, the tiger had seen him and had demonstrated all night until the early hours of morning, circling the tree and roaring continuously. This had become a nuisance, as a drizzle set in, but the good doctor, very wisely, had not risked return alone in the dark when he had such an aggressive tiger to deal with. When wandering in the few areas around Tagarthy where the forest is at all penetrable, I have myself come upon a 3/4-grown tigress lying dead in a clearing, with 23 porcupine quills embedded in her face and chest. One of them had completely penetrated and extinguished the right eye. The tigress was in an extremely emaciated condition. A few feet away was the half-devoured carcass of a panther. The tragedy was not difficult to piece together. Evidently the tigress had attempted to make a meal of a porcupine, which had charged backwards into her face, as these animals do, embedding its quills in her head and chest and putting out one eye. Blinded, starving, and still carrying the quills from the last encounter, the tigress had wandered desperately in search of food. Then she had come upon the panther, whom she had attacked, fought, killed and begun to eat, when death had overtaken her, for some unaccountable reason, perhaps through stomach or other injuries caused by the panther itself, not clearly evident to me from her decomposed carcass. In the hamlet of Bolunder lived a mysterious individual named Buddia, accredited by local inhabitants with great powers of witchcraft and black magic. He was reputed to have bewitched people and brought about their deaths. He was a great friend of mine and, after one of our many intimate talks late one night, he presented me with a circle of plaited creeper stems, 4 inches in diameter, made from mysterious plants that grow, he said, deep inside the forest. He asked me to keep this with me always, on my hunting trips, and said that if any time I was in an area where game did not show up, I was to wait till the sun had set, and then pass the circle 3 times up and down the barrel of my gun. Within 24 hours, he guaranteed, I would kill something with that weapon. I still have that circle, and am ashamed to confess have used it, more than once, where game has been scarce, in accordance with the directions of its giver. Call it coincidence or luck, as you wish, but it has never failed to produce results. Alas, old Buddia is now no more, having succumbed to the dread scourge of malaria, from which even his powers of magic could not protect him. Now, let me tell you about the tiger of Gauja. Gauja is another tiny hamlet, over 6 miles from Tagarthy, and halfway to the forest chowki of Amligala, situated on the borders of the great tiger preserve of Karadabeta, fully protected by His Highness the Maharaja of Mysore for his own shooting. Tigers are not so clever as to know that they should remain within the limits of certain boundaries. Most important of all, no cattle are permitted into the Karadabeta preserve, and tigers like eating cattle immensely. Just outside the hallowed precincts are cattle by the hundred, so what more natural than that there should be more tigers outside of the preserve than within it? About 1938, a particularly enterprising tiger walked out of the preserve and started killing cattle around Amligala, returning afterwards to the preserve where he was safe and sound from molestation. In this manner, he waxed fat, while his fame as a devourer of sleek cows spread throughout the area. Then, as happens with humans, continued success induced greater daring, disregard for consequences, and finally that rank carelessness and overconfidence that brings undoing to both tigers and men. Our tiger had not yet reached this last stage, though he was well on the way, for he wandered farther and farther from the protecting fastnesses of Karatibeta and disdained to return there during the daytime, as had been his custom hitherto. In this way he came to Gauja, where he took up his temporary abode on the banks of a deep nullah that scored the countryside about 1.5 miles from the hamlet. From this shelter he raided the cattle herds, harrying them morning and evening, never failing to kill at least 2 fat cattle each week. Letters had been written to me about this slayer, but I had never bothered unduly about his activities, for after all tigers must eat to live and this old fellow was doing no harm to humans. A few less cattle mattered little to those vast herds. With the passage of time, however, his daring increased still more, and the last reports showed that he was loath to leave his kills, demonstrating loudly by roaring and making short rushes at the herdsmen when they attempted to drive him off. True, it was that hitherto he had not hurt anyone, but I knew from the preliminary indications that this would happen almost any day now. Sooner or later another man-eater would appear. At 9:30 a.m. one morning, therefore, I alighted from the mail train from Bangalore at the wayside railway shed of Attery. From here a walk of 3.5 miles brought me to Tagarthy. I was greeted by old friends and hospitably treated to coffee while a hot meal was being prepared. I occupied the time by gleaning all the news I could, but this did not amount to much beyond the usual account of the presence of tiger in all directions, the daring old tiger of Gauja having earned particular notoriety. After the meal I set forth by can to cover the 6-odd miles to Gauja, which, because the track was in a very bad way, we did not reach till 6 p.m. While talking with the inhabitants, my tent was erected about 3 furlongs away, on the banks of a smaller nullah that fed the main stream. The tiger lived a mile or so beyond. I was told that the tiger had killed 2 days before. Nothing had happened since, but the next kill was undoubtedly due within the coming 48 hours. Sure enough, word was brought at 1 p.m. next day that the tiger had just claimed another victim. Hurrying to the spot, I found the tiger had attacked a cow in the middle of an open field, quite 300 yards from the nearest cover, killed it and carried it away to its hiding place, which proved to be the very same nullah as that in which my tent was pitched. The soft sand of the nullah revealed tracks where the tiger had crept along the bed and then dashed over the bank towards the cow. The cow had run a short distance in an effort to escape, but had been overtaken and slain. The tiger had then lifted the cow across its back and returned to the ravine, as was evident by the absence of any drag mark, though the tiger's pugs were firmer and had sunk deeper into the rough clods of the plowed field, due to the weight he was carrying. I cautiously followed the tracks in the hope of encountering the animal or his kill. This I eventually did, but he did not demonstrate and show himself, as I expected he would. That indefinable sixth sense, which warns the jungle folk in the nick of time, evidently impressed this tiger that here was a human being to whom he should not show himself. While still some yards away in the undergrowth and invisible to me, he became aware of my presence, growled in a low tone and slunk away. There was a suitable tree nearby and I arranged the erection of my charpoy makan. I was in position by 4 p.m. The tiger came at 8, but stood directly under my makan and beside the tree on which I sat. I knew of his approach by the subtle sound of his tread. No dry leaves crackled to betray his coming, but in the stillness of the silent night there was no mistaking that soft heavy footfall. He began to lick himself, his rough tongue running over his glossy coat, making the faintest of rasping sounds. Then he arose on his hind legs and began to clean and sharpen the claws of his 4 feet against the bole of the tree. In so doing, he saw the makan above. A low growl and he was gone, nor did he return that night. The following day nothing happened, so in the afternoon I tethered a heifer in the bed of the main nullah where he was reputed to have his abode and sat up on a macan in a tree overhanging the nullah at an angle of 60 degrees. I was in position at 3 p.m. At 5:30 p.m. I heard a dragging sound and there was the tiger hauling down the bank another cow he had taken from one of the herds. He was quite 80 yards away. Aiming at his neck, I fired, but as I did so the tiger moved forward, receiving the bullet much further back than was necessary for a fatal shot. He responded to the impact with a coughing grunt and catapulted to the bottom of the nullah and was gone. I descended the tree, released my bait and returned to Gauja in the opposite direction, feeling confident I would locate and bag him next morning without undue trouble. But I was very much mistaken, as events were to show. At dawn I was back at the scene of action, accompanied by 2 reliable locals from the hamlet. We picked up the tiger's blood trail at the foot of the nullah, which traversed its bed for some considerable distance before climbing the opposite bank. We followed with every caution, but soon found that the animal had kept going, for there was no evidence that he had sat down to rest from his wound. It was almost 2 miles before he had eventually halted for the first time, feeling the effects of the bullet. He had then got up and continued, and I guessed that he was making for Amligala and the tiger preserve beyond. Once he reached this, I knew he was lost, since to carry firearms into the preserve, even in pursuit of a wounded tiger, was strictly prohibited. He had had a full night's start of us, and despite his wound it looked as if he might gain the sanctuary of the preserve after all. Pressing forward, we came upon 2 more places where he had rested. At the first of these there was considerable blood, and the grass was flattened where he had been lying. At the second there was much less blood, and thereafter the trail became more difficult to follow. Evidently the flow of blood was stopping. Perhaps the layer of fat beneath the outer skin had worked itself into the bullet hole and had stopped the profuse bleeding. We soon found ourselves in the precincts of Amligala, and I knew the tiger had now but a mile to go before reaching the forest fire line that marked the western boundary of the preserve. Here fortune favored us, for we encountered a stream, at that time holding pools of water. The pugs of the tiger on the soft sand showed that he had now changed his mind about heading for the preserve and had gone upstream instead in search of water. We followed and came upon the first pool, at which he had drunk and had lain up for quite a considerable time thereafter, for the tracks leaving this place were comparatively fresh and had been made within the hour. This fact renewed our flagging hopes and we continued for a furlong before coming upon a second pool, where the tiger had also halted. Water still seeped through the indentations of the pugs, and it was now clear he was but a little distance ahead. He might even have heard us coming and had just moved forward. I determined to try strategy rather than follow in his wake, for I greatly feared that he might turn tail and bolt for the sanctuary which lay so close to this spot. Motioning to my 2 companions to climb into a tree, I ascended the bank of the nullah soundlessly, and doubled forward in a detour as hard as I could go, parallel to the line of the nullah. I rejoined the nullah half a mile down its course and tiptoed backwards in the hope of surprising the tiger. But I was doomed to disappointment, for he heard or saw me and scampered up the bank and towards the preserve, as I had feared. I followed his blood trail to where he had entered a patch of dense scrub, which I circled, halting behind the trunk of a tree at the far end. Here I waited, but nothing emerged. If I attempted to summon my men I would alarm the tiger, and I was in a quandary as to what to do next. Very obligingly he provided the solution by moving, as I noticed the grass before me wave to his forward motion, although not a glimpse of his body was visible. The grass continued to wave as he crept away at an angle, so I left my protecting tree and stole forward myself. The grass began to thin then, and at last I saw him, just as he saw me. I fired at his flank and with a roar he charged, but within 5 paces his courage failed and he turned to receive a third shot, which took him pell-mell into the thicket from which he had just emerged. I whistled to the men, who had heard the shots and were themselves bravely coming forward. When they had joined me, I explained the situation and told them to climb to the tops of the neighboring trees in an effort to locate the tiger. This they did, but signaled that they could see nothing. I then posted them up 2 separate trees about 50 yards apart, after telling them to whistle if they saw our quarry, and returned to the nullah myself, in case the tiger should have gone back. It was a nasty business negotiating that narrow ravine, not knowing at what moment the tiger might spring upon me from the bank above or from behind one of the boulders which strewed its course. One of the fundamental principles in following a wounded tiger is never to negotiate the bed of a stream alone, when the wounded animal might be lurking above. But I was desperate, having spent the whole day in following this wounded beast, and feared that yet, at the last moment, it might escape me by dragging itself away to die in Karadabeta. So with baited, closed-around tiger head not into which at the problem, breath and rifle cocked, and with my finger trigger, I negotiated that stream, to find the recrossed it and was still inside the thicket had jumped. How to dislodge him was now returning and summoning the men, we held a council of war. To follow the tiger into the midst of the thicket without knowing at least its approximate location would be suicidal. And then came inspiration. Returning to the stream, I removed my shirt, knotted the sleeves together and tied up the neck. Using it as a bag, we filled it with pebbles to breaking point. Then one of the men carried it back to where I had last fired at the tiger. With this store of ammunition, we began stoning the thicket in all directions, till at last we were answered by a warning growl from the bushes to the right of the point where we stood and about 30 yards away. Evidently the tiger was severely wounded and could not move, for he did not rush out at us, but continued to answer each stone that fell near him with a series of growls. Whispering to the men to stone intermittently to hold his attention, I made a detour of the thicket and began to enter it from the direction of the nullah. I could hear the tiger growling before me, and the occasional fall of the river stones that were hurled by my henchmen. As long as I could hear the tiger I made progress, although the thicket was dense, for I knew his attention was otherwise held. But then, as I drew nearer, he heard me, for his growling stopped. My followers also noticed this and guessed that he had heard or sensed my approach from the rear. In an effort to distract him, they threw the stones higher, further and faster, but without result, for the tiger would not give himself away. I knew I would have to be extremely careful, as he might now attack me at any moment. I halted, every sense alert, straining my ears to hear the faintest rustle preliminary to the last great bound that would bring him upon me. Nothing happened, and as the seconds rolled by in silence, broken only by the sound of the dropping stones, my nervous tension mounted and I became oppressed by an overpowering sense of impending danger. I glanced in all directions, but could detect no movement. I strained my ears, but could hear nothing. Still that sense of approach peril grew stronger and stronger, till I could have shouted aloud to break the unnatural silence, or have turned tail and run. And then I glanced behind me. There between two bushes was the wounded tiger, reddened with its own blood as it crawled on its belly to surprise me with its last great spring. Our eyes met, it roared and launched itself into the air, while the Winchester cracked twice, hurling its powerful bullets right into the face of the oncoming fury. I sidestepped as the heavy body crashed before me, kicked wildly in the air and then lay still, as I sped yet another bullet into its heart at point-blank range. The troublesome old tiger of Gauja had failed to reach the sanctuary of Karadabeta and was now no more. Anderson continued to hunt the tigers of Tagarthy, and he eventually killed all of them. The villagers were overjoyed to be free from the fear of the man-eating tigers, and they praised Anderson as a hero. Anderson's story is a testament to his courage and determination. He faced great danger in order to protect the people of Tagarthy, and he ultimately succeeded. Anderson's story is also a reminder of the importance of conservation. Tigers are an important part of the ecosystem, and it is important to protect them from harm. Friends, next time I will come with another thrilling story by Kenneth Anderson. Till then, bye and take care. Please don't forget to like and subscribe my channel.